Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. And this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's kitchen table topic is poor crime policies. That's what we're going to start talking about. We're talking about bail reform. We're talking about catch and release. From the protests in 2020 to the open borders that recently closed, crime has increased dramatically, but so has poor policies around criminal justice reform. The first significant bail reform legislation was introduced in New Jersey in 2014. While some advocate for the changes in the name of fairness and equity, there are valid concerns about public safety and the implications of moving away from a cash bail system. The New Jersey Bail Reform and Speedy Trial Act, this legislation focused on using risk assessment tools to determine whether a defendant should be released before trial, thereby reducing reliance on cash bail for low-level offenses. The reforms in New Jersey served as a model for other states. The push for bail reform has gained momentum across the nation. Much like the 2014 New Jersey bill, the 2020 reforms came with supporters claiming it addressed inequities. However, the statistics tell a different story. In states that drastically altered their bail policies, such as New York and California, we've seen a troubling rise in crime rates. For instance, data shows that New York City experienced a significant spike in violent crime following the elimination of cash bail for many offenses, with shootings surging by over 250% in 2020 compared to the previous year. But what if you're voting for these policies and you're doing it unknowingly? I mean, am I walking into the polling place and voting for these referendums that are nicely written? They seem great. They seem wonderful on the surface, but then they have this negative effect overall, or at least in the long run. Today, we're going to dive into some of these complex issues. We're going to examine the impacts of these policies on community safety as well as the justice system's integrity. But I'm not going to do it by myself. I'm going to bring in an expert. But first, current events. New Hampshire Senate unanimously passed a bill to roll back portions of the state's 2018 bail reform laws, sending it to the governor. The legislation requires individuals charged with serious offenses to be held in custody until they can be arraigned, eliminating the option for release by bail commissioners. It will repeal the magistrate system that allowed trained attorneys to set bail when judges were unavailable. The new standard for denying bail will change from clear and convincing evidence of danger to probable cause that a person poses a threat. The bill gained bipartisan support in the Senate, with Republicans asserting that it is necessary to address systematic abuse of the bail reform law. In contrast, House Democrats and civil rights groups argue that the existing bail laws have been effective in reducing violent crime rates. But has it? After the break, we are bringing in our expert. We're bringing in attorney Ken Good, who has been on the front lines of bail reform and can address this, give us everything we need, who can tell us whether or not we are speculating. I mean, has there been a major issue? I remember during the 2020 protests, and this is something that really stood out to me. So there was this autonomy zones everywhere, right? And these are just these areas where people decided that they were going to block out a section of the street. They're going to be armed and they're going to allow anyone in, not even police. And there were a lot of Democrats and progressives who were advocating for this, who were saying that this is something that should happen. Well, as a result of that, a young man died being a part of one of these autonomy zones, and no one did anything about it. No one did anything about it. I mean, his father was on the news. His father was advocating for him. No one did anything about it. And turns out in a lot of these cases, there were individuals who may have been arrested for protesting or arrested for throwing feces at police officers or spitting on them or just assaulting them as a whole. However, once they go to jail, they are then sent right back out without any type of cash bail. to just reoffend. We're fortunate to have attorney Ken Good joining me at the table. He's a respected bail attorney, a board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas with extensive legal experience. Don't leave this table. You're listening to the Janelle King Show. This is Extra 106.3. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. Well, welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. This is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And as I stated before, the table topic today is just poor policies in the criminal justice system. And we're going to talk about catch and release. We're going to talk about bail reform. And before the break, I hit you with a few current events. But now that we're shifting gears and we're diving into the table topic, especially discussing bail reform, is something that we all have experienced, whether you want to believe it or not. We've all felt the impacts of it, particularly when it comes to the border. The border has been a huge topic of discussion for those who are impacted by these laws. But what happens when a policy that is supposed to be compassionate turns into a hindrance and has an opposite effect? Well, today I have a guest with me from the great state of Texas. And you know, as Georgians, we love Texas, okay? So he's going to be here to break it all down. Joining us, we have Ken Good, who is a respected attorney. So we're going to say attorney Ken Good, who's a respected bail attorney and board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. With extensive legal experience, Ken has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, as well as various other appellate courts, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He's also an author. He's authored the book, Goods on Bail, a practical guide for bail industry professionals, and has written several articles on bail reform, such as What Successful Bail Reform Looks Like. Ken has worked closely with lawmakers on bail matters and can shed light on the balance between public safety and the push for reform. Attorney Ken Good, welcome to the table.
Well, thank you. Welcome to, I guess, thank you very much for a great introduction. I look forward to the discussion. It's an interesting time, and there's so much information out today that there wasn't, when all these talks started.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to definitely dive in, and majority of our audience is in Georgia, but thankfully we do have listeners all across the country and internationally. But what does Georgia and the rest of the world need to know and understand about these poor policies?
Well, when I think of bad bail reform, I think probably the best way to describe it is soft on crime. I mean, that's really what it is. It's soft on crime policies. And when you hear them talk about what success is, they describe success in lowering the number of people in jail. It doesn't have anything to do with crime rates. It's all about we need to right wrongs from the past, and doesn't have anything else to do with really criminal justice. We know what works. And all through this discussion about criminal justice reform, we know what criminal justice policies work, and that's what specifically has been under attack for the last 5 years.
How did you get involved in this? I mean, I know obviously being a part of the bail bondsman and doing all of that work, but what's the personal attachment to this?
Okay, so I started out as an attorney representing doctors and hospitals when they got sued, was very successful, was on court TV, won my case. And then, but I've always had an appellate perspective. And so I've always did appeals. And so even when I was doing medical malpractice, I would do our appeals, and we would go to a medical malpractice seminar, and they would have a section or a presentation on new and important cases at the appellate level. And 3 of the 5 cases were mine. And so a bondsman got himself in trouble, had some default judgments, and he said, "Who do you hire for that?" And they said, "Well, you need an appellate attorney." And someone sent him to me. But on the bail reform movement, I was in Houston on a case, or visiting a client, and someone said there was a hearing going on in federal court, and it was in O'Donnell versus Harris County. very important case, early hearing, and I went in and listened, and I came out scared to death because number one, no one was setting out the argument, I thought, in the correct manner. And number two, I thought the judge was going off the rail and was going to make the wrong decision. And so I came out setting off the alarms and I said, we have to become experts on these topics, because if we don't, then no one else is going to present the argument in the correct manner. And I think time has proven me correct, especially with that judge, because she's been reversed 7, 8, maybe 9 times now. And specifically the O'Donnell case, the Fifth Circuit ultimately ruled in en banc, which is the entire Fifth Circuit, that case should have never been filed and should have never been in federal court. And that is a seminal case that people all across the country looked to for a couple of years.
Interesting. So what's the connection between catch and release and the bail reform?
Well, okay. So when your jail's overcrowded, if you want to have immediate impact on it and reduce it, you just switch to catch and release, because those people get diverted and they don't ever go to the jail. The problem with catch release is automatically you're starting with something that has a 50% failure to appear rate, because you're just getting a little ticket to you to say, come to court on this day and this time. And these are already problem children. And so they need somebody to remind them. And it's just like me, if I don't have an alarm set before important podcast recording, I might forget it. And so it's the same problem, especially it's even worse with problem children. They need somebody, they need a mom sitting on there and saying, you got to go to court, you got to go to court, or a bondsman, you got to go to court. Catch and release, just here's your ticket, here's when you go to court. And there's nobody to remind them. And so it has a high failure to appear rate. That does substantial damage to the criminal justice system, because when you don't show up, your case gets put on hold. And that's what we're seeing now, especially with COVID, are huge backlogs. And anytime you have a backlog, there's very few ways to address it. One way is to dismiss cases. And that's what we're seeing predominantly. And so, catch and release, high failure to appear rate, de facto decriminalization, green light to commit more crime.
Now, does catch and release, is that only for those who are entering the country? Like, how do we explain catch and release? Is it who benefits from that?
Oh, who benefits? See, I don't think the original argument on catch and release, the people that benefit is the counties, because they're going to spend less money on their jail, because they do a simple analysis saying this person in jail for this many days times this amount, this is how much you would save. But I think over time we've learned that green light to commit more crime has much more damage to society, especially look at California, where they're doing all this shoplifting, and it's lowering the value of commercial buildings. And so when you've got a commercial property that's selling for 20-30% of its value from 4 years before, I mean, the damage that you've done to your community through just that alone is far greater than anything you saved on catch and release. But catch and release is going to benefit the counties for people for state crimes. It's going to benefit the government for catch and release for people at the border. But it's short-sighted release. I mean, short-sighted benefit that's very muchly outweighed by societal benefits, the crime benefits especially.
So what I'm hearing is, so there's been this conversation around catch and release, and I think the general public thinks that catch and release is a policy that is only specific to the border, because it's always talked about when we're talking about migrants, right? So what I'm hearing when you mentioned the shoplifting in LA, that it could be anybody. Like, this policy can be enacted at any time. And while there are counties that may be over flooding with or overwhelmed by all of the inmates, instead of putting someone in prison who needs to be, or putting them in jail who needs to be there and needs to sit there, they're just saying, hey, here's your ticket, go on, hopefully you'll come back, basically, right?
Yes, New Jersey, we call New Jersey, did some reform, we call it the New Jersey plan, and that was a central part of theirs is, they designated a list of offenses as low level offenses. And so they just immediately change those to catch and release. New York has done something similar where they just make a list of crimes where you can no longer set bail, where they may have to go to jail and immediately be released. But that's a very similar form of catch and release because they cannot be held. And so the problem with that is organized crime, gang members, career criminals learn very quickly, hey, if I just commit the same crime, no matter how many times, as long as it's just low level catalytic converter where organized crime can make millions of dollars quickly, they figure it out. They figure out the system. And that's the problem we're having. These compassionate, like you said, compassionate policies, these organized groups are learning how to take advantage of them and run and make millions of dollars.
This reminds me of something else. Young boys so my brother works with a lot of young boys that have terrible rap sheets. Okay. And we're talking about 12, 13 years old. And it's phenomenal how our young boys have gotten caught up in gang violence. But a lot of it has to do with policy, because there's policy that says that if you're of a certain age, you're not tried as an adult and you don't get a certain level of punishment. So you have grown men now soliciting little boys and having them do the big crimes while they do the little crimes. And it's really wild. And now we have all these young boys whose lives are being destroyed. So let's continue.
That's a great point. I mean, that's the perfect example of compassionate policies that, they sort of make sense, but then you see how they're being perverted and taken advantage of. And like you said, no one's looking at these lives that are being destroyed as a result of them. And if we had looked at the original policy through those eyes, would we have ever passed them in the first place? No, we would not.
That's a great point. I think a lot of it has to do with public perception. And there's a perception that the criminal justice system is working against us, particularly when it comes to minorities. It's like, you're out to get us. There's no policy that benefits Black people or Hispanic people. That's the perception. But
the problem with that is there's so much science out there that disputes that. I mean, I think even in Minnesota, they did a study, or they discovered they have data all the way from the person calling in the crime all the way through the criminal justice system. And so they started releasing data in 2023 about it. And they discovered that certain minority groups report crime 10 to 1 over others. And the problem is when that minority group then gets into the criminal justice system, they're treated better. Their results are better than other groups. And so that kind of explains why we have more of one minority group in our prisons or in our jails, is because if you take that out and extrapolate, we have significantly larger amounts of crime being committed, 10 to 1. And there's reasons for that. And they're not good. Historically, we have discounted crime on certain minority groups. And so, again, organized crime, career criminals, gangs have looked at what the government's doing and said, we figured out a way to take advantage of it. And so they do. And so the very minority groups that we say we're enacting these policies to benefit, they're the ones getting hurt the worst by these policies.
Absolutely. No, it's repeated. There's one stat that I keep in my brain because I always have to bring people back to reality. And I think we have about 50 million police interactions a year, but of which less than 1% end in police brutality or some type of police, issue. And of that 1%, majority of those are against white males. So if we really look at the data, it's just not reflective of the narrative.
Well, the data I like to say is, 50% of all murder victims in the United States are young Black males. And the people that are committing those crimes are also young Black males. So how in this entire debate did we decide that we're going to focus and we're going to choose the murderer over the victim and say we should treat him better than the victim? We've turned this on its head, this whole argument, this analysis.
Oh my gosh, I feel like, I feel like I'm going to have to add a light bulb because you just had a moment for me. Because you're right. Anytime we protect the criminals, we are disregarding the victim. And
Yeah.
for all the young men and all the when you talk about that stat, the 50%, a lot of times those crimes go unsolved. So
Mhm.
we're talking about victims on victims on victim, moms and sisters and family members that are suffering because we want to have compassion for the criminal. Oh, okay. We could talk about that all day.
In some respects, we're repeating the same mistakes that we made in the 60s. In the
Mhm.
60s, we felt more compassionate. We were more forgiving on our criminal laws. Crime started going up. We couldn't get the politicians to agree on how to address it. One party refused to participate. And so we had a period where we couldn't decide. And then we had a backlash. And then we had Reagan and we had the war on drugs. We have just gone through that same period again. And I would argue that we should have had this backlash result 2 years earlier. And the only reason why we didn't is because of the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion,
Mhm.
because the backlash on that overcame the backlash on crime. And then now 2 years later, with 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 Trump, the border, and also all this evidence coming out that they were suppressing so much, it's just blown up. And so the backlash is going to be bigger this time because it's been suppressed for a long time.
Interesting. So would you say that there is a link to bad policy and rising crime rates? Because critics say if we change these policies back to the way they were, then we're going to see a raise in crime rates. So what do you say?
I say that we had a presidential election where we had one party say we can't address the border because we had a bill that would have fixed it, but we had one party that wouldn't cooperate, and then 6 weeks into the new administration, we have a border that has a 95% less amount of people passing through it. In 6 weeks, we solve the border problem by doing what we know to do. Crime is the same issue. And we have a great case that illustrates this. It's called Sanchez versus Alabama, where they were forced to live under these soft on crime policies and they would not settle. They wouldn't agree to drop their case. And they just, the sheriff was a old military guy, and he's like, this just isn't right. And I'm not giving in. And so when 4 years later, they got to the Court of Appeals and they reversed and remanded the case, and they got to re-implement accountability, re-implement consequences if you don't show up for court. And the sheriff told me on a podcast, it took us about 6 months. But what do you know? We went back and instituted the policies we know that worked, and crime went down about 6 months later.
That is so interesting. And you know what? I agree with you 1,000%. When we looked at how fast the border closed, it was within a matter of days. And
Yeah.
not only that, but strong leadership is also a deterrent. And
Oh,
so
I agree with that. Yeah.
there are a lot of people who said, I'm not going. I'm not going to take that trip because I already know this administration is not having it. So that being said, let's explain this bail reform, because what people hear is, and I must say, whenever I do know people have gotten pulled over for like a traffic citation, right? And then they were put on probation or some type of fee and they had to pay for a traffic violation. And that became extremely expensive, and then it led to other issues. Now, I'm not advocating for taking care of people's personal business, but there are people who may feel like having cash bail, if I am a person who can't afford it, then do I just sit in there? Because aren't we innocent until proven guilty? So what's the alternative?
Well, that's the problem with the private surety bail system. There was a former judge who was a mayor who was on a News Nation town hall talking about criminal justice reform and bail reform, and the point she made was, look, until you have an alternative to the private surety bail system that has the same high level of accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. So we have systems in place to protect the poor. So we can grant them a personal bond, we can release them without bond, depending on where you are. But the problem is those really aren't alternatives. They're there to protect people, people who are poor and they're first time offenders. If you're in jail, you've got a rap sheet that's a mile long and you say you can't afford that bond. You're not there because you can't afford the bond. You're there because you have a long criminal history. And the system says that's fine. So I disagree with the premise that I think people are stuck in jail after 10 years, 5 years of bail reform, that first-time offenders are stuck in jail. I don't believe that. And that's what our law enforcement says. The problem that we have right now is we don't know who to believe on crime statistics. We have such a well-organized machine on the advocate side that they will release something and they'll call it a study, they'll call it a something, and it's just pseudoscience. Historically, the people that we should always listen to, or who we've always listened to on crime statistics, is law enforcement. And somehow in this debate, law enforcement has been demonized. We need to go back. We know what works. We need to rely upon law enforcement. And when one of these Soros-funded groups comes out with a study, a week after the FBI updates their crime statistics to show that crime has increased, when for the last 2 years, all these same groups were saying crime is not up, just look at the FBI crime statistics. And then within a week, they released a new report that said, well, it's not as a result of bail reform. It's all pseudoscience, it's all science, it's all crap. It's just advocacy dressed up to look like you should believe us when you should not believe any of that.
It's so important to note that George Soros has sent millions and millions of dollars to a lot of these attorneys and to push a lot of the policies that we're talking about. And I have to mention this because I think a lot of people feel like when they hear Soros or the Soros attorneys or any of these terms, they get confused. And I did do a show that talks about Soros, the Clash of the Billionaires. And I did talk about in depth who he is and why there's so many concerns around him. But let's be clear, he utilizes violence and disruption to collapse governments. And if you don't believe me, who do you think was funding the protest, the Black Lives Matter protest that was taking place in Europe? So I think I hear someone in the background.
So I think the point that you're making is there's nothing that you could say that would not that's strong enough, because this group or this side is so organized. Number one, they identify soft on crime people to recruit to run. Then after they do that and they get them elected, then they have another group that invites them to seminars, and then they're told, here's the policies that we want you to enact because it's quid pro quo. And then you have these pseudoscience groups that do reports that say, when you enact these policies, it will not increase crime. Here's the report that proves it. And then they have a final group that gives you press releases to sell it to the public. I mean, you will never see a group more funded, more organized, and have done more damage to our country.
I totally agree, 100%. Where does defense attorneys, prosecutors, judges, what role do they play in being able to either roll back some of this stuff, or are they pushing it forward?
Well, that's a good question, because, the best, our system was originally built that the judge should have as much discretion as possible, because the purpose of bail is to get you to come back. What assurance are you going to give the court that you're going to come back and answer the charges, and you're not going to be a continuing threat to public safety? So these reforms, what they're doing is they're tying the hands of judges so they can't do their discretion. So they, like New York, here's a whole list of crimes that the judge can no longer set bail on. He has to release them without bail. And in California, they tried the same thing, and it didn't pass a proposition review by the public, by the voters. But then we've got cities doing it. The prosecutors are the ones. That's where Soros has found his biggest fertile ground for disarming the criminal justice system. Because if you can take a prosecutor and then get him to agree he's no longer going to prosecute certain crimes, he's no longer going to seek enhancements. Enhancements are so important. So if you've got a drug dealer who's found with 20 pounds of meth, 20 pounds of fentanyl, the difference between enhancements and non-enhancements is he's just a possession of drugs. That's 2 weeks in jail. 20 pounds, and enhancements is 20 years in jail. So when you get rid of the enhancements, you no longer file those. I mean, career criminals, organized crime, that's cost of doing business. Spend 2 weeks in jail, take a vacation. And then when you match that with this open borders, you've got the cartels bringing their drug operations into the United States, not laundering their money through the United States. I mean, you've got, I did a podcast about California where they legalized marijuana, and then the drug cartels took it over. I mean, they've had so many of the legal marijuana companies declare bankruptcy, and I mean, the cartels are bringing in their own employees from the open borders policy, and they're not even afraid of getting arrested because it's been decriminalized. So with the closed border, we're fine. And the scariest thing about that was I posted a story about that before the election, and it immediately got deleted.
Really?
I posted it again, and it got deleted. And I thought, okay, I'm naive, and I'm like, well, maybe someone just fooled me. Maybe this isn't a real issue. And then Trump started talking about it. And then since the election, I did a whole podcast on the story with the reporter who was reporting that.
That's fascinating because the whole decriminalization of marijuana was supposed to create an opportunity for people to go into business and to become successful in that lane, right? And to regulate it. But that being said, it sounds like it's working in a different direction. But I have to say that California having such weak leadership, it makes sense that they will just set up shop there. But are you seeing this all across the nation? Because I do know fentanyl did rise. I mean, we were not having conversations about fentanyl in America the way we're having them since the borders.
Yeah. I do think we were having problems across the country, and it wasn't just the Mexican cartels. We also had some Chinese cartels, some Russian cartels, and so it's just across the spectrum. And I think that's one of the Venezuelan gangs. And so, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's why we had so much of this being suppressed. I mean, remember the famous interview where somebody was talking to the vice president and saying, well, it's just a few apartments that are being taken over. And he's like, are you listening to yourself? Where is that proper? I mean, the suppression of those stories just to try to win one more election, no matter what the cost to our country, will make the backlash even larger this time.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that, when you're arrested, it's because you've committed a crime. You've done something, or at least you're being accused of a crime. May not have been found guilty as of yet, but there's probable cause. So the best way to divert from being in that situation is to not commit crimes or what could be crimes. But do you think that what's the balance between having compassion, or should we even have compassion?
Here's how I think we should measure compassion, because I think we have this small group of people that are committing 60 or more % of the crime in a given city. So we have this city within the city that is committing a large part of the crime. And then you've got this gray area between the law and order citizens and the criminals. And on any given day, they're looking to see which side am I going to follow today? And so I think where we should be falling is with enough pressure to influence the gray areas. So they say the penalties are too much. I'm going to fall into the law and order side of the fence.
Okay, so and let's talk a little bit about those gray areas. What are some key gray areas that you think we should avoid?
Well, I think what influences the people in the gray areas is accountability. If you're going to be held accountable for what you're going to do, then you're going to say, okay, there's consequences, so I'm not going to do that. And that's probably the biggest problem that I see when we start doing these soft on crime policies. We quit having any accountability. And when you stop accountability, that's a green light to commit crime. And, like in Harris County, when you have someone who doesn't show up for court once, twice, 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, and he still gets released on a personal bond, which is the same thing as just cite and release, because there's no consequences. Why would they not perceive that as anything else other than a green light to commit more crime?
I always hate to interrupt a great conversation, but we have to take a quick break. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. This is the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3, where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And if you're joining us for the first time, don't worry. You can catch an encore episode tomorrow at 9 a.m. right here on Extra 106.3. And remember, our podcast drops every Tuesday wherever you get your podcast. And if you're feeling eager, you can watch the video podcast right now on YouTube. Just remember to subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble pages, and your likes, comments, and shares are always welcomed. Now grab a seat and let's get back to the table. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. Now you're being brought back into our conversation with attorney Ken Good as we're talking about bail reform and just poor criminal justice policies. I think we've been desensitized. I think about this cartoon, Aladdin, from back in the day. And Aladdin would run into the market. He stole fruit from the market, ran off, and they made it seem like that was okay because he was poor. And then we started having these conversations around, well, if they're hungry, what if they're hungry? So stealing from another person has now been desensitized because the person who's hungry now matters more than the person who manages the market. And I think has a lot to do with it too.
But okay, so I'm going to tell you a little personal story. I grew up very poor. I mean, my family was so poor, we qualified for free lunch. And we, as a family, decided that we didn't want to accept the free lunch. So we would go home every day for lunch so that we would not accept a free lunch program. And so there are people who are poor that have good, are blue collar people who just want to work hard and get ahead. And that's really, that's what we should be celebrating. I mean, I came from a small town, a poor family. My parents were both public school teachers, but they taught me the importance of education. I went to college. I went to law school. I got a master's degree. I've argued cases. I mean, I've done things that, I've gone from moving pipe, irrigation pipe in the peanut fields to arguing cases at the Supreme Court of Texas. I have been very blessed by what we have in this country. Anyone, I promise you, if I can do it, anyone can do it. But the problem is we're not willing and we're not teaching that you have to be willing to put forward the hard work to get it.
I think about the people who have to live in certain areas, right? The fact of the matter is, no matter where you go in the country, no matter what city you're in, there are areas that are more affluent and there are areas that are not. And that's just how it is. And you shouldn't have to be subjected to crime simply because you have to live in a certain area because that's what you can afford. That does not make any sense.
When we start measuring our self-worth on what we have, we're always going to lose. No matter what you have, there's always going to be somebody that's going to have more. There's always going to be an Elon Musk. And you don't compare yourself to anyone else. You compare yourself to where you are, where you want to be, where you expect it to be. And are you content with where you are? Okay, I've been very successful, but I didn't get married till I was 36 years old. And I like to tell people my life didn't begin until I got married and had 2 girls.
And that's the thing. It's like life is a journey. And so I want to leave our listeners with just some hope, right? So For those who may be impacted by this, those who are listening and may live in an area with high crime and is concerned about what's happening, what are some positive things that are coming down the pipeline that you feel good about that may help reduce crime?
Well, I see us doing a return to what works, and I see us getting rid of these policies. I think probably the border policy is helping the most because we're sending a signal to criminals that we've had enough and that we're not going to put up with this anymore. So I think that's number one. And here's the biggest way I'm hopeful is because I see this return to law and order in large parts of our country. And if the only places that we don't return to law and order are urban cities, the difference is going to be so stark
Right.
between there and the rest of the country that politicians are going to discover very quickly that their voters are not going to stand for it.
Yeah.
Because anyone that can afford to move is going to move, and the ones that are stuck there, they're not going to stand for it. And so I've always said that I think we will ultimately change course because what we were doing at the time, what we've been doing is not sustainable. And, you know, when you decide not to prosecute crime for certain things, you have rampant shoplifting as a result, and then you have property values for commercial buildings go way down. I mean, that's not sustainable. The next step is, you know, bankruptcies of urban cities. And that's why you saw probably a year or two ago, mayors start speaking out on these issues because they were seeing where their tax dollars were going to go down. And so, I mean, I just don't think what's been happening is sustainable, and you're seeing the change. The election of Trump, I think, was in large part because of the economy, the border, and crime. And I think the next election, with the way that one party is reacting to this, we probably need one more election, and then both parties will return to law and order, and then we'll be able to fight on other things going forward.
So what do you say to people who think that, well, the Bell's bondsman community certainly wants to get rid of this because they're not benefiting from it, these policies? Is that true? Or where is the connection with the Bell community, Bell bondsmen, and then these policies?
Well, okay, so here's what I would say. The bail industry is so closely intertwined with the criminal justice system because they're pseudo state actors. That anything that's good for the criminal justice system is going to be good for the bail industry. And I would go back to what the retired judge said. Until you get something that has the same level of accountability and same high or low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. So what we're trying, I mean, we don't have any science that supports it other than this pseudoscience. And it's not an alternative. It's really what it is we have to put up with more crime. And that's really what they're telling us. Because of our history, we have to be more compassionate. So we have to put up with more crime. We've learned the lesson from the border is we don't. I mean, we can fix this. We can fix it quickly. And we know what to do to fix it. And our politicians have been lying to us when they say we don't have to and we shouldn't be.
Whenever you have someone who is an expert on a topic, they have written about these topics, educate yourself. Do not find yourself in a position where you're believing the narratives, you're believing poor policy initiatives or whatever the NGOs, these are non-government organizations, are telling you. Educate yourself. So tell us a little bit about your book and your closing statement, and just let us know what do we need to know about bail reform.
Well, if you want more information, you can go to our website, pbtx.com, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. But I think also we have our own podcast called The Bell Post. There's a link on our menu, but you can also go to thebellpost.com. It's one of the top 10 ranked criminal justice podcasts in the world, which I fully admit is not a large audience. But I mean, we focus on criminal justice issues. And if you want to know what the New Jersey system is, we have a podcast about it. And that's what we do. We delve deep into these issues and we want to be a resource to legislators and the public, so that when these pseudoscience groups step up and say, oh, when we do this, it won't cause more crime, we will show you where it's wrong. We'll show you that it's a lie. And we can tell you exactly why California is doing what they're doing. And the reason why is because they won't build additional jail space. And so everything they do is to decrease their prison population, and they say it will decrease crime when it's not even the intent. The intent is to decrease the prison population because they won't build additional space. So those are the types of things we talk about. And it's been so much fun talking to you today, but things are going in the right direction now, and things will get better.
I hope you will come back and join the show, because I have several questions. I want to know about overpopulation and if this is something that people are really feeling. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into criminal justice on the show at some point, and I will absolutely reach out to you and would love to bring you back.
Thank you very much.